Please.
I don't want to weaponise a scandal, and the scandal of homelessness does continue unabated in our jurisdiction, Taoiseach, the jurisdiction over which you have responsibility. We've seen 156 rough sleepers counted in Dublin, up from 110 in the spring. We don't know how many families in emergency accommodation will be displaced in hotels and B&Bs rented by the state that close over the Christmas period. So, whatever the facts that you trot out, the government is not delivering on the supply of housing. Your predecessor as Taoiseach said he had a performance monitoring system for all ministers and their departments. Can I ask you, Taoiseach, do you have such a monitoring system? And are you satisfied with the performance of all your ministers? In particular, are you, Taoiseach, satisfied with the progress currently being made in the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government? Do you stand over it? Minister Eoin Murphy has made a number of high-profile commitments, photographs taken and statements issued. But where is the legislation? Bills put forward by the Labour Party and the Greens to curb the use of microplastics 2 years ago were rejected at that time, subsequently accepted in principle. The Minister has launched heads of a bill. This is 2 years on. We've yet to see that arrive in the Oireachtas. My colleague Senator Humphreys has spent 2 years again seeking regulation of short-term lettings. Minister Murphy finally agreed in September to legislate in this area. But where is the legislation? We've been promised, and you've repeated the promise, of a rental register, which Threshold was calling for again today as a tool to expose massive rent hikes. Promises made, but no action. We've been told about a new land agency, with draft legislation we were promised months ago would be before government in November. Has that happened? We've been told new height regulations for the building industry will be published, which developers are awaiting and holding back on planning applications until they see it. Where is it? In September we were told that Waterford, Limerick and Cork would have directly elected mayors. We're now looking at a plebiscite in those areas next year to allow for those mayors, but where's the supporting legislation that will tell them, the people who are going to vote, exactly what these mayors are to do? Or are people expected to vote a pig in a poke? My direct question on all of this, Taoiseach, and I could go on, is whether you, as Taoiseach, are satisfied with the performance of the Minister for Housing, Planning and Local Government. Do you stand over and accept the performance of that department? Will you undertake a review of all these matters? And will you publish that review so that this House can judge whether or not we should continue confidence in the Minister for Housing, Planning and Local Government?
Thank you, Deputy Howland. Taoiseach.
It was my understanding that you already don't have confidence. I'm not sure what you mean by, I believe you voted that way, so I don't know what you mean by having continued confidence. You've already made that decision that you don't. But I have confidence in the Minister for Housing, and I have confidence in all of the ministers that serve with me around the Cabinet table and the Ministers of State as well. And you're right to point out that I have a political responsibility for this jurisdiction. But you shouldn't forget that there was a time not that long ago when you and your party had political responsibility for this jurisdiction. Sitting beside you, Jan O'Sullivan, next to her, Alan Kelly, ministers that together held the housing brief for 5 years. A minister that promised to abolish homelessness by 2016. A minister who introduced measures which most people now accept, probably made a bad situation worse. Do you have confidence?
Order, please.
Do you have confidence in your deputy leader? Do you have confidence in Deputy O'Sullivan, given their performance, when they held the housing brief together for 2 years, Ceann Comhairle? Because it would appear that the deputy is applying some pretty unfair double standards in this regard. Some pretty unfair double standards in this regard, because the situation emerged and got worse under the tenure of those two ministers. And I think it's unfair to personally target Minister Eoin Murphy when he's not willing to express a lack of confidence in his own colleagues. 40% of the Labour Parliamentary Party held the housing brief for 5 years. Let's not forget that. The government is delivering on supply. As I pointed out, we will build more new homes and apartments in Ireland this year than any other year this decade. Between 18,000 and 20,000 new homes and apartments have been built this year in Ireland. And we acknowledge it's not happening fast enough. And we're going to do everything we possibly can to get around those constraints and reach our new housing target of 25,000 for next year and 30,000 for the year after. And those are the kind of numbers that we need to get to in order to get on top of this crisis. With regard to the Land Development Agency, it's already been established. It exists in law. We've established it using a statutory instrument, has a CEO and has started on its work. On the microbead legislation, we're absolutely committed to doing that, and the Minister has been in contact with Deputy Sherlock about how we can cooperate to make that law. And when it comes to directly elected mayors, we always said there'd have to be a plebiscite first. And there will be a plebiscite, and it will happen in May. And long before people vote on that proposition in May, they will understand what they're being asked, just as they understood what they're being asked when it came to the referendum on the 8th Amendment, just as they understood what they're being asked when it came to the referendum on blasphemy.
Howland.
I'm not interested in rewriting history or the rules of collective cabinet responsibility. I'm interested in addressing the issues of today. It suited you well and fine to take the credit for the progress made when you were sitting at the cabinet table with us. But let me put to you the issues that you're responsible for now in a recovering economy, not an economy that is in free fall. We've heard today that notices have been sent to families from Tuha Housing in South Dublin, telling them they will have to leave at the end of an 18-month stay in transitional housing. They're not currently counted in your homeless statistics, but they're faced with a return to homeless accommodation as they've been unable to find private accommodation or afford that private accommodation that might be available. These are the issues that I expect you to address, to explain rationally to this, our national parliament, rather than to think that you're on the back of some lorry electioneering right now. We have serious matters with people in desperate straits that need a straight answer from a Taoiseach that should have answers for them.
Thank you, Deputy Howland.
Thanks, Deputy. The straight answer to that question is that TUA is a housing association, and it's offered issued a notice to quit in relation to people who have 18-month tenancies, but none of those people will be victims of emergency accommodation. You have that assurance.